Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining Namali and me for this Enneagram Type 8 panel. And to create some context first, the Enneagram is a personality type system which divides human personalities into 9 types based on specific preferences and drives. And by studying the Enneagram, we can cultivate greater compassion for people who behave differently than we do. So today, Namali and I are hosting a panel with people who primarily identify as Enneagram Type 8s. And we could think of Type 8s as assertive people of influence who are likely to be effective leaders. And often Type 8s are called challengers, deciders, or protectors because they tend to use their enormous willpower and energy to make their mark on the world, to control their environment, and to protect themselves and their loved ones. Indeed, Type 8s have a deep desire to be in charge of their life. Now, of course, some of the advantages of living life with an emphasis on influence and control are that Type 8s are typically good at leading other people, at making difficult decisions, and at generating impact. And of course, one of the disadvantages of living life with an emphasis on influence and control is that Type 8s can sometimes make decisions without taking into account the needs of others around them, which can lead to disharmony within their personal and professional relationships. Now, within the Enneagram, Type 8s, like Type 1s, are anger types. And Type 8s typically express anger, for instance, by raising their voice, moving forcefully, or adopting an aggressive physical posture. And as a result, other types can sometimes experience Type 8s as confrontational and intimidating, even though the anger of Type 8s is often a defense mechanism which Type 8s use to protect their vulnerability. Now, if we think of Type 8s in terms of levels of functioning, we can say that when Type 8s function at an average level, they tend to be self-confident, decisive, and protective, but they can also be aggressive, dominating, and sometimes blunt. And when Type 8s function at an unhealthy level, they can become ruthless, destructive, and dictatorial. And when Type 8s function at a healthy level, they tend to be decisive, magnanimous, and heroic. Now, broadly speaking, Type 8s can cultivate healthy functioning by learning to communicate with others with a certain degree of sensitivity and tact, by learning to make decisions which take into account both their own interests and the interests of others, and by learning to be vulnerable around people they trust. So Namali, what more can you share about Type 8s?
Yeah. So every type on the Enneagram has a basic fear and a basic desire. So sort of capturing everything that Lee has said thus far, the basic fear of the Enneagram 8 is that of being harmed or that of being controlled by something else or someone else. And the basic desire in general for all 8s is to protect themselves and to be in charge of their own lives and their own destiny. So when we get in the way of that, that's when sometimes the 8's fierce need to protect their independence will come into action. The vice and the virtue of every type is also really interesting and important to know. So the vice or the passion in the Enneagram language really is the passion as in a struggle, such as the suffering, such as in the suffering or the passion of Christ. In that sense, the passion of the Type 8, the suffering, is born out of lust. And this lust isn't necessarily about sort of sexual lust, although it can be. It's really for an 8, a lust for experience, a lust for more of anything and everything. And that could be both good and bad. And their virtue is innocence. It's actually which means that they're willing to trust, which is a hard thing for a Type 8 to do, to trust someone or something else outside of themselves. And this innocence means that they're willing to trust, and that gives them the gift of being able to lay down their guard and be vulnerable. And this does not come very easily to most Enneagram 8s. We also want to talk about the wings. So the wings for any of the types on the Enneagram are the 2 types that are on either side of them. So Given that the Enneagram 8s generally tend to be very powerful, people who are in charge, good leaders, Enneagram 8 with a 7 wing is typically referred to as the maverick. And they're often natural leaders. These powerful 8s with the 7 wing might show up as a little less guarded, more lighthearted in some sense, a little funnier, and maybe a little bit more extroverted, and oriented more toward experiences. Whereas the Enneagram 8 with the 9 wing who's referred to as the bear, this powerful 8 is perhaps a little more oriented toward people rather than experiences. And so this 8 could have a little more of a calmer, softer demeanor, more collaborative, and perhaps even a little bit more relaxed. Then we also want to speak about the arrows. So for the type 8, when a type 8 is really having a rough day or having a rough moment and is perhaps caught in the constraints of the ego, they're actually disintegrating. The typically self-confident 8 can suddenly become a little bit more secretive and fearful, and can also isolate themselves and go hiding into what could look like an unhealthy Enneagram type 5. So when that happens, they sort of have to dig themselves out of it and come back into the world. And when moving in the direction of health and integration, when an 8 is having a really good day, they could look, so the typically controlling and sometimes overpowering 8s can become more kinder and a little bit more caring and softer and connected to others, like a healthy Enneagram type 2. And now the subtypes of an Enneagram type 8. So for every Enneagram type, you can put 3 of the same or multiple members of the same Enneagram type into one room, and they can each look really different from each other and be surprised to find out that, oh, you're an 8 or you're an 8. And the reason why even 8s inside the same room can look different is because of the subtypes. And the subtypes are self-preserving, sexual, and social. And self-preserving basically means that in any of the Enneagram types, a self-preserving is wanting to defend themselves and have a natural way of approaching threats or anything that feels like a conflict through their first approach is to preserve themselves. So the subtype self-preserving 8, these are the type 8s that are sort of like no frills, no drama, very direct, and they go out into the world and they get what they need to preserve themselves. And they don't talk much about it. They don't make a big drama about it. They don't typically like to talk about themselves very much. And they can also be a little bit secretive and very protective of themselves and their privacy, but also really protective of others that they care about. They're very self-sufficient, and they actually really want you to be very self-sufficient as well. It can be a little annoying if you show up a little weak around them. So you want to sort of meet them at their power. They're very direct. You could say they're somewhat territorial in some ways. And sometimes because of this sense of a little bit more introverted and focusing on themselves as 8s, they could sometimes be mistaken for an Enneagram type 5. The sexual or one-to-one subtype of the type 8 is often referred to as possession, or even sometimes called the commander. These 8s are all about the chemistry and the power and the passion. And this time I mean passion as in passionate. As are all sexual, as are all type 8s on the Enneagram, but these type 8s, the sexual type 8s, they really want to assert themselves and really control their close relationships. The relationships are deeply important to them. This is why they're called possessive or possessors, in possession. They really want to know that they matter to their significant other or to their significant relationships and their work, almost like that very intense sense of relating to one another. They can really go against the grain, and they can also be rebellious. They're not afraid to put up a good fight. And they're intensely emotional. That this is out of the 3 Enneagram 8s, this one is the most emotional, and which also makes them quite sensitive at times. So these 8s can sometimes be mistaken for a type 4 or a counterphobic type 6. The social subtype of the Enneagram type 8 is called the friendship or the group leader, or sometimes the gang leader. These 8s are less about themselves, and they're much more about others. So these are the counter type of the Enneagram 8, meaning that they are the subtype of the 8 that can sometimes not look like the stereotypical 8 that we read about and we learn about, because they're much less about themselves, more about others. They're the 8s that love to help others. They're very supportive and deeply protective of others. And all 8s are like mama bears to some degree, but this 8 resembles that mama bear idea the most. They really fight for the underdog while really seeking out leadership roles. They can't help but fall into leadership roles often. They can be very loyal to social causes and friends and family alike. They love to network and create safety nets for everyone to feel secure. So these social 8s can sometimes, because of their collaborative nature and the fact that they spend a lot of time with other people, they can sometimes look like a type 9 or a type 2. So with that, I'll hand back over to Lee, and we will go around asking a simple question from each of you.
Indeed. So, Alistair, can we start alphabetically with you, please? And the question is, how did you discover that you are a type 8 within the Enneagram personality type system, and how does being a type 8 show up in your life? And if you can give us any concrete examples, then please do.
Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you for to Namali and Lee for creating this space to show up as an 8. That feels like a very generous thing to do, and I'm grateful for that. July 2018, as part of a journey of self-development, Adrian and I and one of our daughters went to an Enneagram weekend, and we didn't really know what that was going to be about, and we had very vague understanding of what the Enneagram was. It started on Friday night, and the presenter spent about an hour and a half with us, taking us through some of the material that you've just shared, and a couple of other pieces which really stuck with me since that time. And one is the animal archetypes of the Enneagram, and the Enneagram 8 as the tiger often is helpful for me when I need to do a bit of roaring to just bring some energy to a space where it needs it. And the other idea that was very helpful was the concept of redemption and moving from, I guess what in Integral we would call moving through the developmental stages, or you could think of as ego transformation, transmutation. That the concept of redemption in a spiritual sense was also very relevant to me, because I realized that I'd been living a lot of my life without the spiritual part of me being present, and a lot of what has happened, and the Enneagram was part of it, was the opening up to that. And the presenter said to us, well, the rest of the weekend's going to be very interactive. So we arrived on Saturday morning, and it was like this. It was panels, and through Saturday, we went through the types 1 to 5, and by the end of the day, all three of us, Adrian and I and our daughter, were feeling a little bit confused and not quite sure about anything, because we didn't see ourselves, other than maybe having a little bit of what we now know is, because I'm an 8-wing 9 and Adrian's a 9, we both had a little bit of an inkling that some of all of these parts was in us, but it didn't really resonate strongly. So we went home on Saturday night and spent a fair bit of time talking about what we'd learned, and the process is largely what came out as a valuable thing on the Saturday. Being able to see people in a group and feel their energy, and then ask them questions, clarifying questions that, were able to kind of get really direct feedback and responses on, was very powerful. So we arrived on Sunday, and by Sunday afternoon, we'd seen the last of the 3, the 6, 7, and 8. And then we went, yay. Olivia said, I'm a 7. I said, I'm an 8. And Adrian said, I'm a 9. So, that was really great. And what was powerful was seeing the group that was your type was really just like a mirror. You could feel the energy of it. You could feel the way they responded to the questions. And you just thought, well, for me, it was almost like, sort of an enlightening moment, really, to go, oh, there's a tribe. I belong. I'm part of this. And I felt like this is really, really great. And ever since that time, the Enneagram's become a sort of flourishing thing in our family, because we've shared it with other family members, and we use it for all the things that you use the Enneagram for, but not the least of which is to help us navigate, situations where there's tension, and bring humor and insight to it based on the typical type responses. So that's been really great. To the second, to sort of, I guess, really touch the second part of your question, Lee, the main characteristics for me are the challenge piece. My natural reflex is always to challenge. And what I suppose I've learned more about this redemption process is the subtlety in how to challenge through time. So bringing, a spirit of inquiry, curiosity, that childlike way of being, changing my listening to being much more of a compassionate listener, having more second person perspective, and bringing more playfulness, bringing the jester, bringing occasionally the tiger if the tiger needs to roar a little bit. That's largely how I show up with that quality. The protection piece is also very strong. I have a lot of father energy, so I have to be very aware of that in my interpersonal relationships. And just going through some of those things that Namali was talking about, I'm a 1-on-1 sexual subtype. So I'm always aware of the sexual energy and a power dynamic that I'm in, and I have to be careful of that, but also notice how useful that is for me, because over time, I noticed through the arc of my life, most of my friends have been women, and I have quite a lot of, sort of feminine energy in it. So being able to integrate the feminine divine and with the masculine has really helped me in that softening process. And then the last piece, I suppose, in terms of like, why do you get out of bed in the morning? It's about the social cause. It's about seeking the truth. It's about justice. And I do not tolerate bullying at all. You won't know now, but I used to be a redhead. And so I grew up as a sensitive redhead, and redheads always, I think, at least I did, experience quite a lot of bullying. And so I'm very protective of my friends, my family, anybody that gets close to causing trouble, then I'll step in. And I hope that I show up with a greater subtlety than I did when I was younger. When I was younger, it often came out physically. Now I have enough spaciousness to allow that energy to transmute into more curiosity. But if it needs to show up physically, it can, and it can do that sometimes quite strongly. So yeah, I think hopefully that sort of is a response to your question, Lee.
Yes, perfect, Alistair. Thanks. And it's very interesting, as you say, to see that other people share, like in a sense of a tribe, share motivations, fears, drives that you don't share with every other human being. And we do seem to be particular types, and we do seem to have tendencies toward particular types of behavior. So it can be very enlightening to see how other people navigate the realities of being a particular type and the challenges. And we'll speak more about that later. But thanks for some really nice examples. And Esker, I'd like to hand it over to you. Because you and I know each other quite well, and when Alistair mentioned the tiger, that struck a chord for me, at least in the way that I know you, in how you challenge yourself and other people in, for instance, the boxing and weightlifting and all of the things that that you do in life. So please, how did you discover that you were Enneagram Type 8, and how does it show up in your life?
Thank you very much, Lee, and thank you also for this panel. It's a really good chance, like Alistair mentioned, a good chance to connect with other eights in this way. So I really appreciate that. I think when I first came in touch with Enneagram back in 2014, 2015, when Lee and I met for the first time. And for me, I think the description of reading what an 8 is really resonated with me, and it sort of answered the question of a number of questions regarding who am I and why do I behave the way I do. So that was quite an enlightening experience, and it still is. And every time I read back about an 8, or I'm confronted with, or for example, just rereading, in preparation for this Zoom meeting about an 8's characteristics, it really opens my eyes once again to why certain things trigger me in my behaviors. So I think for me it's quite an enlightening experience how they show up in my life. If I think about protecting oneself from a very young age, I've very much been inclined to the physicality of boxing and kickboxing. So I competed in boxing for 10 years. And it actually came about because at school I was bullied. And after being bullied at school, I became the bully. And I also realized that wasn't really a very kind way of living my life. So then I adjusted my focus and actually became more obsessed with the sport in terms of, putting it into practice and representing New Zealand at a high level. So in terms of that physicality, what 8's, for me anyway, what I seek in terms of doing something with my energy, that physicality of boxing really resonated with me for a number of years. And about 10 years ago, I stopped boxing, and now I'm doing weightlifting. So still that physicality of lifting weights and doing something with my energy in a physical sense that really satisfies my need to do something positive with my energy that I have. And I think when I'm at my best, I'm really focused. I am a natural leader. I find that when I enter situations or work situation or friend situation, that I'm naturally inclined to ask, okay, so what do we want to do? How are we going to do that? Let's go for it. What do we need? And I'm very much inclined to take that leadership role, whether it's conscious or unconscious. I just seem to place myself in that role quite easily. And that's when I'm at my best. And it's also quite interesting to hear that that my life, I think, is surrounded by is being kind of filled with experiences. Like I have the desire to live in different countries and experience different things and to travel, and not so much about, certainly building a career is important, but building a career is less important compared to what do I do with my time and what kind of experiences do I have in my life. So when I'm looking back at my life, when I'm 80 plus years old, I can think of those experiences and be pretty proud of myself. And that to me is I think more important than staying in one place and building a career. So in terms of that side of things, I do seek experiences in life, and often those experiences are decided overnight or within a few days, and Obviously, like I do take people into consideration, but it's less important what people think as opposed to what I want to do in my life. And so that really resonates with me as well.
Phyllis, you're not quite sure that you're a type 8. So the question for you is, how did you become curious about whether you're or not you're a type 8, and which things show up in your life which influenced your curiosity?
Thank you first very much, Namali and Lee and the whole panel. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's so interesting to hear so far 2 people speak, and so many things that I do resonate with and things that I don't resonate with. I started to look at the Enneagram about 3 years ago, and initially I thought I was a 4, and because I feel like my tendency is to lead with emotion and to be dramatic, and I had been an actress and a singer, and had this kind of feeling like I needed to be special, and so I really did think that that I was a 4, and then it sort of became clear that I wasn't really a 4, and looking at everything and getting some opinions, I was you're a 9. You're a 9, and very insistent, not from me but from people around me. I'm a 9, and I certainly can relate with a lot of 9ness, in particularly the sloth, which is so not an 8 thing. It's just not an 8 thing, and Nomali, I believe that the first time that Nomali kind of got an idea about 8ness and I often speak of myself as a football player, and that I do things big. It's like my tendency is to approach things in a very robust, full out, bull in a china shop kind of way. and then I started thinking back to my childhood, and in my childhood I would have to say almost unquestionably I'm an 8, and I was an extremely angry child. I threw massive physical screaming temper tantrums for the first good part of my life. I did not have friends. I felt very judged. People would say about me that, well, if you look at her, sideways, she'll start to cry and scream and throw herself on the floor, And so there was this real uncontrollable anger as a child that had me very, very isolated. And it was a real decision for me when I was sort of like a young teenager that I could not continue a life being like that. And so I very, very consciously began a life of doing an awful lot of work on myself, and to make me more acceptable to myself, to have me be more acceptable to myself. I am the whole, I believe that I am in the anger triad, which would include the 9 and the 8. Except the difference is that my anger is not typically anger out. It's typically anger turned in. And they don't really speak about that very much when we speak about the Enneagram 8. I do not like to be controlled. I really do not like to be controlled. I remember when I first met my husband, one of the things that he said was, we were out and he said, I don't know, my first marriage, I allowed her to do anything she wanted. And I said, you allowed her? So who are you to allow anyone to do anything? And, I mean, it was, and he turned out to understand that. So we had a pretty good marriage, but the whole idea of someone allowing me to do something is just sort of not part of my MO. I don't ask for permission. I may ask what you think. Not I may ask what you think. If you're important to me, I'll definitely take what you think into consideration. But I won't ask for your permission. There's that. I think that that I want very much to be a positive influence to the people that I care about. That's really important to me. I think that in terms of vulnerability and that, aspect of the 8, I remember when I was younger, I was thinking about it, and I remember for a good part of my life saying to myself, well, I am going to expose all of my vulnerabilities, tell everybody, and that way they cannot use them against me. So if they know them up front, then I'm safe. I am, in fact, protecting myself because no one's going to be surprised. And so I am protecting myself. And I think that sort of like, in a way, that's being an 8. And, in a funny kind of way, if I tell you before, you find out, I'm safer. I think that I'm thinking more and more that I likely am an 8, but I think that I am likely a sexual subtype. My emotions are very, very, very out front with me. I tend to lead from emotion, and regulating that is a big challenge for me. So there's that. I really could relate to under stress, moving to an unhealthy 5 and really starting to isolate, go just straight into my head and straight into self-criticism. But when healthy, definitely moving to a healthy 2, and where being helpful and being supportive and it's like almost like that's the person that I aspire to be, is a healthy 2. In terms of leadership, in the times in my life where I have been involved in situations where that would be a real issue, like when I was acting, singing, I was always the lead, and I was always the, there's nothing chorusy about me. If I'm going to be in anything, I'm going to, have a substantial role in it. And when I went back to graduate school, which I did in my 40s, and, first I went to undergraduate and then graduate school, and I definitely not took a leadership position, but assumed sort of, I was a leader in the class. We were, a class of 15 people, and I just was the leader of the class, and not in a way that was not collaborative, because I think I was extremely collaborative, but I just sort of was. And when I was working, I remember when I first went, I was an intern in the hospital as a speech and swallowing therapist. So we were dealing with people who couldn't swallow for the most part. And I would walk in with my supervisors. Now, first of all, I was a bit older than my supervisors, so just because I had gone back to school late in my life. But the patients would always speak to me. And that has been, that was just throughout my career, that no matter who was standing around me, if advice was to be had, or if, the final word was to be had, if someone needed it, they turned to me. And my family is sort of a lot like that too. So I think I'm speaking a lot, but that's, those are the first things that come to my head. So the more I'm investigating 8ness, the more I see a lot of 8ness, and yet the way that I live my life now I'm considerably older. I am not working. I haven't worked for a while. A lot of my family has passed away. I'm not needed in the same positions that I once was. And I don't believe that right now in my life, I behave like an 8. And that's where the kind of push and pull has been. I can see it in so much of my life, but I don't see it over the last 10 years of my life.
Yeah, thanks, Phyllis. And as we've said previously many times, of course, the Enneagram is an approximation of reality. So it's a model and not reality itself. And confusion can also be because the model is not reality itself, and that you are just a person who does not fit within the categories described by the Enneagram. So that's, of course, one of the explanations. And there are also perspectives on that within the Enneagram type system, some people as children resemble more the wings of their type and then move more to the core type throughout their life. So it's nice to be able to explore these possibilities and to recognize at least some of the themes. So for instance, you speak about anger as being something that you resonate with because across the Enneagram we have the anger, the fear, and the shame types, and 8, 9, and 1 types. 8, 9, and 1 are the anger types, and that does tend to be unmistakable for people which emotion is their core emotion and core challenge also. So that does tend to be easy for people to say, okay, that's the one I most resonate with. So then indeed the question is whether it's 8, 9, or 1, and you could be any combination of those with a wing, of course, within the system. So,
well, just one other thing, which is that with the wings, I can really see both 7-wing and 9-wing in me, because there's a part of me that's a real substantial part of me that has a very sort of bawdy sense of humor, and that's a real part of me, and that's a very kind of 7 part of me, I think, and yet there's also a part of me that is in certain situations much less extroverted and more introverted. So I even see both wings in me.
Yes, and of course for all of us, of course, every human behavior is available to us. So we can experience all of the types to some degree or another. And indeed, of course, it's a question of degree. So to which degree we experience ourselves as one particular type more often than others. So Tyler, over to you. And the question indeed is, how did you discover that you're an Enneagram type 8, and how does it show up in your life? And if you can give us any concrete examples, please do.
Sure thing. And thank you guys so much for having me too, Lee and Molly, and hey, type 8s. All right. I can resonate with all 3 of you guys so much. I'm actually really new to this. So at the Integral conference is when I had a lady tell me, she says, "You're a type 8. And it was really pretty. I've heard of the Enneagram, but it's still very new territory. And then Nomali sent me that video to watch on the panel, and I definitely resonated with the type 8s. And I'll start with Alistair. You're saying, let that lion roar. Heck yeah, brother. I hear that. And with this physical energy that I have, that like every day, that go fuel of like, all right, how can I channel this to be, well, at first it was, and kind of like you said, Phyllis, to almost, well, protect yourself. I guess if I could start back, we all kind of have a common theme of getting bullied, and it's like not feeling, me and personally, not feeling good enough. So need to make myself bigger and better and stronger and smarter. And I think learning even on this panel today is like, I'll go into my head way more. instead of being totally here, present in the moment, I'll recourse right back into my head, overthink things, and kind of isolate instead of fulfilling that leadership position, which is kind of where I keep finding myself. So I was in the military too, and really a big thing that happened for me was, I'm able to, and even like today, a lot of things are happening. A lot of people are coming to me looking for answers, and not necessarily that I want to be in that position, but I'm able to, I kind of orchestrate it, and things slow down, and it just makes sense for me of how I can use other skills in towards a mission. Once I can slow down, because I get too rambunctious, I get all that energy. And so for me, like waiting on this panel, it's going to be my turn. I don't know what I'm going to say. I'm going to wing it. Kind of what I do is and I have a lot of maturing and growth to do. And what I have learned about the Enneagram, it helps me a lot with these blind spots. But, I just get all that energy. And if I don't direct it towards something like growth, it can fester into turn negativity. And I just want to isolate. But I know when I'm healthy, it's like, all right, and show myself that self-love and gratitude. It's like, I think a lot of it is feeling that hurt when I was younger, and to getting bullied, and like you said, Alistair, not wanting to see other people get bullied either. And that's kind of what I'm working towards now. It's just kind of landed on my lap, being like a personal trainer. We can get our bodies real strong, but I think every one of us kind of feels too. It's that heart. We for me especially, I'm just so sensitive, and it's right. It just kind of takes me to a whole new level, and it's like washing that ego. It's hitting that ego, and I'm not really able to fully just totally let it be or bounce off. A lot of times I'll hold on to it, and then a lot of times I'll use it almost as like a tool to get stronger. Well, why did that hurt me so much? How can I dig into that? And what was it that stung so bad? And it's kind of like using it as like a life's teacher. And when I was really young, when my old man, he was really pretty of an aggressive guy. And I think and then the kind of looking more back into it, had more and more traumas that happened when I was a kid too. They kind of made me have to protect my sisters and my mom even, but I wasn't able to do it. And it would give me a lot of nightmares. And a lot of nightmares of not being able to protect the ones I love. And that's why I just kind of like, okay, well, in this life, it's like training for me, training for the ultimate test. How can I get strong enough to be able to show up, even though I have these parts of me that doesn't necessarily want to? How can I communicate more effectively if we're using words? But even when I was younger, it was the physicality and getting beat up and stuff. It's like, I can't keep living life like this. I got to do something. And Esker, I also picked up a little box, and I've been working out for about 20 years. And I think that helps so much with not only a spiritual connection for me, the mind to muscle, but then feeling physically strong and still so emotionally and mentally weak and inferior. And it was like, okay, so there's got to be another way to, and this is kind of what I'm learning still, like, and also helping others to see how to get stronger, not just, with the whole unit. I hope that goes kind of coherent. Sorry, I was rambling all over the place.
No, Tyler, it's very beautiful. You're speaking about holistic strength development, which is, I would say, is the pathway of the type 8. And I think Alistair was also pointing towards that. And when I think about type 8s, I tend to think of them as people who've been exposed to power differentials where they've been disadvantaged, perhaps early in life, where they've seen that in life, as individuals, we often have to relate to structures or people who are more powerful than we are, and that to develop a sort of a shield to protect ourselves and others, that type 8s can then indeed, as you say, build themselves up and strengthen themselves and become very good at reading power fields, so to speak. And in the military, there are many examples of military commanders who've been typed as type 8s because they're able to read terrain and read troop formations and sort of extract information out of that and make decisions very impulsively, which are completely accurate and which make the best use of the available force to achieve a victory. So when you speak about that you're almost surprised at being elevated to a position of authority within the military by your fellow soldiers, that I would say that's a natural evolution of the path that you chose basically as a young person, by developing yourself and by developing the skill to want to protect yourself and others.
Thank you. I totally agree.
I'm wondering if maybe, even just briefly, I'd love to maybe go back to Alistair, and we'll sort of go in the same order. I'd love to hear, Alistair, and the others can kind of give this a little bit of thought too. Now that you know that you are an 8, and Phyllis also playing along with this idea, do you have any stories that you can share? Just like one story or one sort of clear example where you really saw that you were in trouble, or you could have gotten someone else in trouble because of the struggles of the 8, the more sort of the unhealthy ways in which an 8 characteristic might show up, and also maybe perhaps within the same story or a different story where you really showed up with the beautiful, magnanimous gift of the 8. So the struggle of the 8 and the gift of the 8. So I'll come back to you, Alistair.
Thanks, Namali. Great question. I like to answer that by responding about a repeated pattern in my life. And the pattern has really allowed me, the gift of the pattern, which has been a real struggle, which is the people that have turned up in my life, which I would classify as having the darker energies, which are a threat to that innocent inner child that Tyler's talking about, and the heart-centered nature of who I am and who I think we all are as humans. And so that those darker people with those darker energies have allowed me really throughout my life to explore that edge of anger. And all of the, like when I was 13, I got into a fight where it really scared me because the red mist of anger, just appeared, and I nearly killed this person who was, I had to be dragged off him. So that, a bit like everybody's saying, is a really scary experience. And then in my 20s, I learned martial arts, and I was lucky enough that our teacher taught us meditation, taught us acupressure, taught us all of the softer elements, as well as how to fight, using all of our body and our mind in a whole integrated way. So that really sort of set me on a path of also exploring all of these different colors of anger and how to understand them. And so, the learning that, for example, my anger always began to arise from my gut. And so I could feel it arising in my body. And when I felt that, I realized that that was such a gift, because instead of letting it come out verbally or through my fists, I could transmute it. I could give it space, and I could bring it out in really positive, healthy ways. For example, curiosity, and I could start asking questions and start going, oh, well, that's an interesting thing. Tell me more. Why do you say that? That's a really interesting observation, and start to really language it and energetically hold it in a completely different way, which I think is, part of that journey of self-awareness. So one story that comes to mind was a particular journey with one of our eldest sons, who's had a lot of troubles with addiction and got involved with a group of people who were not particularly healthy. And we had to stage a major family intervention to get him out of the country, because he was on the pathway where he was probably not going to live much longer. And I found myself having to deal with a lot of the anger associated anger with him for getting us and our family into that space, but equally well seeing in a very compassionate way what had taken his trauma, had taken him into that space, and then having to really step up and put myself on the line and get him out of the country. And believe you me, traveling on an aeroplane to out of the country, as it happened, to take him to a Buddhist monastery in Thailand, where they specialize in helping people with addiction problems. That really was an edge for me. And traveling with an addict is never easy. And there's a whole long story about that one day Adrian and I might get to write a book about, or he might get to write a book with our help about. And the good news about it is that's, some years ago now, and he's making really good progress. But it really allowed me to sit in the fire with that anger and learn all of the subtleties that go with it. So sometimes when it's overwhelming, I'll just have to take myself into the guest bedroom and do like a Feldenkrais process, kneel at the end of the bed and hit the bed, because it's just too much in my body. Other times, as I shared, I can sense it and work with it. Or the, a bit of Tai Chi, a bit of yoga, going for a walk, or as I've gotten older, I notice that a nap will transmute the energy as well. So yeah, hopefully that's a response to that question, Amali.
Yeah, beautiful. I think a lot of us actually, sometimes the energy of the 8 is that sort of the woof, the fire hose kind of energy, and it frightens some of us sometimes, but actually really healthy 8s are the best people to look up to as far as learning how to channel our anger. Every one of us has anger, and most of us don't know what to do with that anger. And so I think 8s are incredible teachers in learning how to express that anger in a really healthy way. To have a good conflict is a good skill to develop. And no one but an 8 can really teach us that, as well as an 8 could. Yeah. Well, thank you, Alistair. How about you, Esker? Where have you learned that, this is the struggle that I keep encountering or have encountered because of my 8ness, and here's the beautiful gift that I'm blessed with because I'm an 8?
Really good questions. I think was probably in my early 20s when I realized that I had always felt the anger, and I could place it, but even placing it wasn't really leading to a solution. And I think it wasn't until the early 20s when I started actually realizing and accepting the fact that I needed to do something with that anger and with that energy, and realizing that the best way for me is to focus on physically doing something positive with my energy. And so when I think before my early 20s, there were 2 instances which really pop up in my mind. And one of them My brother had his 21st birthday as an older brother, so I would have been about 17 or 18, and we had some beer there, and I remember a few gang members showed up to his party, and in my enthusiasm and my will to protect my brother, I challenged them to a physical fight. I mean, these guys would have been 20, 30 years older than I am, and probably 40, 50 kilos heavier, but still I wished to protect my brother, and I challenged him to a fight, and they ended up leaving. Fortunately, there was no violence, but it convinced him to leave anyway. But it was pure out of a will to protect my family. Another instance I can think of was after dancing in town, and a group of girls were threatening my friends, and I stood up for them, and that eventually did lead to some violence, which I'm not very proud of. But I think those two instances really made me stop and think about, okay, I need to channel my energy, and what are the best ways to channel that energy? And I found that in sports. And I think now my biggest realization the last 10 or so years is that the best thing I can do with the knowledge that I've accumulated over the last 20 years in sports is to help other people empower themselves through learning how to defend themselves and protect themselves and stand up for themselves, and not only on a physical way, but also in a mental way. So I'm involved a lot with coaching others to feel stronger, if you like, in life, to learn how to protect themselves and stand up for themselves, but also in unknowingly and not necessarily a very conscious way, but I also seem to inspire other people to lead more positive lives and more healthy lives. And that's not necessarily a conscious decision, but it seems to have happened. And it's a great position to be in, I believe. So those are, I think, a lot of struggles that I've encountered, and how I channel that energy is really by focusing on what is healthy for me through, for example, meditation. Walking helps, being out in nature helps, but particularly being really conscious about what I do with my physical energy every day. So whether it's going to the gym, whether it's going for a walk, whether it's actually being physically active, and as long as I have that as a base, then I can be calm in my mind, and I can be in control of what happens around me and not be reactive, if you like. So that's kind of how I deal with that.
Beautiful. Yeah. Each of you, as I'm listening, it's just so easy to hear that sort of the power of somatic intelligence that is so innate to an Enneagram type 8. It's really beautiful. Yeah. Thank you, Esker. How about you, Phyllis?
Actually, 3 stories come to mind, and I'll just try to make them short. One was when I worked at the hospital, and we had a terrific department. I mean, we really had such a strong department. But the boss was the boss of several hospitals who was off-site, and she came in one day and doing things that, in my estimation, were really disrespecting the group, and I recall she was sitting down, and I recall standing and leaning over the desk, and very loudly proceeding to really scold her and tell her that she was micromanaging and that she was ruining, this. I mean, I to this day, I sort of can't really believe that I did that and get my job. But it was it was there. I don't recall a moment of deciding to do that. It was really taking just a very aggressive, very direct stance, because I felt like what she was doing was so wrong, and really doing something so wrong for the people that I worked with and really had a lot of respect for. So there was that. Recently, even though I said that I'm not seeing my 8-ness too much in my life recently, I realized that I actually have just had an experience where I did, and I early in January was in the hospital for a week and was in a very vulnerable situation where I experienced, aside from a lot of pain, I actually had a situation where my life was in danger, where people were, because of mistakes being made, and where my trust really was eroded. And I have had tremendous trust in hospitals and in my doctors. And this was sort of a week where that was just completely eroded. And it has taken me close to 3 months to find my way back from completely, and my family was so wonderful, and everybody really rallied around me. My friends everybody rallied around me. And I found that that over the last month or so, I have just kind of really pushed. I have isolated to such a large extent, and have tried to be sure that everybody knows how much I appreciate it and how much, but I just have needed to sort of figure out how to get myself together, because I was completely, I just went to a place of complete self-flagellation, and I just didn't want any, and so all of my interactions just felt like I was fronting, and felt so inauthentic that I would just rather just kind of hide and isolate. And thankfully I am, past that and have dealt with that, and did need to really kind of deal with it on my own. And we could talk about strategies, later, but it wasn't something that I could, that I felt at any rate, like I could really talk out. And then a time that it really, that I think eightness worked for me was when my husband was very ill, and he had a stroke, and for a year, he was quite ill, and I was really pretty much doing everything. And then for 2 weeks, he was in hospice in our home. And I had, not that long before that, broken my back and had some challenges, physical challenges. And yet when he needed me, I knew how much it meant to him for me to be the one who took care of him. And I know that I really stepped up, and I know that I really found strength and energy, and just knew exactly what to do. I just knew exactly what to do. And I knew that I honored him, and I knew that I took care of him, and I knew that, that I was unfortunately at a time when he was not very healthy. I was in many ways at my healthiest. I really, really stepped up, and I'm in many ways at peace because of that, and wish that I could be that. Again, that would be the person that I would aspire to.
Yeah. Beautiful. It's again another story of where for the 8, when push comes to shove, even if the 8's body is hurting, you just had, you talked about how you've had a back injury, but when you felt you were needed, your body just stood up and just came to the moment to help someone else. Yeah. Thank you, Phyllis. And how about you, Tyler? Where have you brushed up against the struggles of being an 8 and the gifts of being an 8?
Well, thank you, Nomali. I think the struggles for me, for sure, have been figures, like authoritative figures, putting me in a box and saying, hey, you got to do this. So it's crazy enough, I went in the military. You know what I mean? It started with my stepdad. And another kind of part of that is really people talking down to women. or just mistreating women is a huge trigger for me that makes me see red as well. And just probably because of my sisters and my mom, I feel like those are the ones that raised me and loved me and was able to protect me when I wanted to protect them. And now it's like, if there's a figure out there who's trying to tell me what to do, it in the past, in my earlier age, it kind of bit me in the ass for, again, even for jobs. Like, I want to show up every day. I want to work hard, but I kind of want to set my own schedule and do my own routine. And so that's always kind of been a struggle. And then I guess with that anger to kind of come through like a hairpin trigger, really. And now I'll tell you, Molly, it's like, so I'm in my first serious relationship, I'd say, where I'm pretty, I'm pretty much going to marry this woman and I love her. And I can be so, even still, angry or cruel. And it's like, there's a part of it like, wait a second, And so I see there's like this whole, she's really integrating this feminine energy too. Thank you, Alistair. And it's like, whoa. And then when that floodgate opened up and I could show my softer side to somebody I really trust, I think I cried for like 3 weeks. I was like, oh my God. It was like, this is so beautiful. And, but having that trust and just that I want to be there and protect you, but I still have a lot of issues. I still have a lot of anger. And like you said, so I don't think I'm totally healthy now, because I would like to eventually help others who are dealing with it. But it's like, I still have to deal with it myself. Mm-hmm. And I agree, Esker, I hope I'm saying the name right. Letting it out with, if I can anchor myself to physical training, and I know that, hey, at the end of the day, I can make myself better a little bit by pushing myself. That I think really carries over into life. It's like, I'm trying. I'm not perfect, but damn, I'm trying. And I will say another thing too, I really like is cold showers. I've been taking those too for like 15 years and I love them.
Very good. I think we'll have you speak about practices just super briefly in a little bit also, but I also just wanted to say, from hearing you, Tyler, just now, I've heard this from many eights where something happens and sometimes the eight is reflected, or they get to have an experience where they actually get to relax into the sweet, tender, childlike, almost vulnerable place inside of the eight. And when they get to trust someone in that space, they are like the sweetest, most incredible, most sort of the juiciest little things. And the eight is just so delicious and so sweet and tender when they are able to go into that trusting place. So I just really loved hearing about that. And I'm sure that there must be some truth to that, to all of the eights here. And yeah.
Yeah, and indeed, Nomali, you and I, of course, we've watched the Beatrice Chestnut panel, Enneagram panel videos, and during the 8 Enneagram panel, Beatrice Chestnut compares type 8 to teddy bears in combat boots. So I like that image.
Yes.
And so indeed, as you were saying, Nomali, and many of you have already mentioned some practices, but if you can indeed share with us some or many of the practices that you engage in to navigate the challenges of the type 8 personality structure.
Maybe if I may add just a little bit more, because you have already spoken, each of you have spoken about practices, maybe if I may add a little piece to that, which is unique to a type 8, is perhaps practices that help you come to that place of trusting and touching that place of vulnerability, and even being able to reveal that vulnerability. I'm really curious if you can add that little piece to your practices.
Thanks. So I have to respond to the teddy bear, Lee, because I have a teddy bear story. So my grandmother gave me a teddy bear when I was about 5, and she knitted all the clothes for it. And it's during the course of my first marriage, which lasted 28 years, my teddy bear sat in the cupboard. And then when I decided to leave, afterwards, as you can imagine, quite a struggle. But largely speaking, fostered by a sort of a near-death experience in hospital, and kind of realizing actually I'd stuffed down all these feelings for so long that the body just wasn't going to put up with it any longer. And so, what do as a 52-year-old man? You go and live with your mother. And so I found my teddy bear in my cupboard, and I left my former wife and former family home and drove around to my mother's house with my teddy bear. And I said, Mum, my teddy bear, the eyes have fallen off, and the teddy bear cannot see anymore. And I'd really love it if you would sew some new eyes on my teddy bear so I can see properly. And so whilst I lived with my mother for a few weeks, she sewed new eyes on my teddy bear, and I still have my teddy bear. And that's a real sort of metaphor for me of that process of the beginning of, redemption, coming to who I truly am, and being able to show up authentically, compassionately, courageously, and mindfully. So, thinking about practices and being a sexual one-on-one, the most important practice is presence in my relationship in a daily basis. And I'm just forever grateful for, a bit like Tyler was saying, the amazingness of the woman in my life, because I fundamentally believe that as a man, it's crucial to come to redemption through the holding and the love of a woman. It's absolutely been critical to me, and I've noticed other eights and other people who have gone on that journey as well. And one of the practices that we do is we have alter egos called Bert and Ethel, and and so we play all the time with Bert and Ethel. And the good thing is that that gives spaciousness to any tension. So, Ethel can say to Bert something as opposed to Adrian saying to Alistair something, and it doesn't land in the same way. That doesn't mean that Adrian won't have, she's very courageous and she'll step up and have the conversation with me and say, you're not going to like to hear this, but this is what I'm going to say, and have that conversation as well. But in general, most of the time we play like children in our relationship, and that keeps me safe, and I think is a particularly healthy way of being. Of course, there's all the other integral life practices, like we meditate together in the morning, and Adrian does Pilates, and I do a bit of Tai Chi and yoga, and all those things to be, in the body. But I would say the primary practice is presence in relationship for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's beautiful. I love the play with the proxies. So basically, you both have a proxy for your own self, and that allows you not to take interactions too personally and to see the relativity of the self as a construct. So very beautiful. Thanks. And Esker, how about you?
Thanks for that, Lee, and also thanks for that, Alistair. I can definitely resonate with feeling present in your relationship. And for me, really, it's, I guess on the outside, it looks like, to me, what it looks like is quality time with someone, with the people I care about and who care about me, feeling important, feeling loved by that person. That's really important for me to form a base so that I can find a balance eventually between letting go of my secretiveness, if you like, and also being vulnerable, feeling safe enough to be vulnerable. So, yeah, I think it starts with quality time in order to develop that trust and to be able to open up. Yeah, in a nutshell.
Well, thanks indeed. And also, of course, you already described the physical exercise processes. And for me, it's also interesting to see how many type 8s are also physically a representation of their stamina and drive. So they can be muscular and well built because they channel some of their enormous energy into creating a healthy physical body. So,
yeah, I think that's a really important part of what you say there, Lee, because that part of that quality time is also being able to train together. So challenging myself and challenging my friend or my partner or whoever to physically out themselves is also a really important part aspect of that quality time for me. So it's integrating both. I think are really important ways for me to be able to trust someone, physically being able to see what they're physically capable of allows me to trust that they can stand up for themselves, that they can protect themselves. Maybe that's a full circle example of what's important for me to have trust in someone.
yes, and Nomali was already saying that type 8s tend to want to be met with a similar intensity and similar strength. So, and because it can be sometimes frustrating for type 8s when they show up as themselves and they overwhelm others. They basically blow them away because the others they encounter are not able to summon the same degree of strength to meet them at their level of intensity. So it's very nice if you can train that together, and you can see perhaps also other ways in which people, perhaps not even physically, but perhaps mentally or emotionally, can have the same fortitude as type 8s can have physically.
For sure, absolutely.
So thanks for that. And indeed, Phyllis, over to you.
Well, I've meditated for most of my life. I started when I was about, I don't even know if I was 16 yet. It was that time in the world where people just experimented with a lot of different things. And I experimented with transcendental meditation and pretty much have been a meditator throughout my life, with a couple of, twists and turns where I stopped, but that's been a pretty strong practice for me. As I said, I decided quite young that I didn't want to be who I was. And so I worked very hard in therapy to try to sort of contain myself, to like soften the edges and to figure out how to do that. And all of that cognitive work, and then my husband saved my life because my husband was just this, first of all, he was a very, very strong man. He was a very strong man, physically very strong. And so there was always a sense of physical trust and tremendous love and love that was so healing in so, I don't even know how to speak about that really, other than, love and that kind of relationship. That is, Alistair and Esker, you've spoken about, practice, presence in relationship and relationship was, and still is in many ways with, different ways with different people now, but being in relationship with first my husband, who taught me how to do that. And then with family and friends now. I have friendships now in a way that I could have never had before. But more recently, I've done parts work. I've done family systems work. And the more embodied the work, the more that I find that whereas I have understood for a long time what the dynamics of what goes on with me and around me, change has been very hard. It's like you can understand it, but actually behaving differently is very difficult. But the more embodied the work, the more I feel the physical change. And I feel like being able to that really helps me not become, like very overwhelmed by whatever it is that I'm being overwhelmed with. Interestingly enough, I've had for many years, I asked my husband, one of our first gifts that I asked for from him was a whole body punching bag. So I do have a punching bag down in the basement that for many years I used, pretty strenuously. I love to learn. I love contemplative work. I love finding. I think a lot of my practices have to do with how can I find my growth edge in wherever it is that interests me. I don't know if that makes sense, really, but I will seek out something that I feel like can help me become more. Those are the things that interest me.
Yeah. And that the challenging and the self-challenging is very much typical of type 8s, and it can drive them to great heights. And before the call, Esker, I mentioned that you did the weightlifting competition in New Zealand, the world weightlifting competition, but we didn't discuss that you the fourth in your weight class, in your age class of the world now. So that's and of course also just to big you up a little bit more, that you also, I think, twice were a New Zealand national boxing champion, or perhaps 3 times. 3 times, okay. So that's a way in which,
and also
indeed,
3 times, in the Netherlands.
Oh, well, that's a beautiful example of how, when type 8s push themselves, they can really have an impact. So Tyler, over to you. You already spoke, of course, about how your intimate relationship is a gateway for you into vulnerability and self-acceptance and softness. Are there any other additional practices that you can share with us?
Yeah, I'd say like one I kind of do on a fairly regular basis would be like, we kind of talked about working out, but I really like taking that into the contraction and then the expansion. And so like all that energy, if I can just squeeze my calf right now as hard as I can, and if I'm feeling all that energy, or, I'm working out and I contract my muscle, and then I expand and I allow myself to unfold, and I really think that is transformative as well. And I think too, with especially like if I'm feeling anger or I'm feeling a strong emotion, if I can try to pinpoint it, or even like Ken Wilber says, and videotape it, if I can really try to find those edges of it and then let go. It's still there, but I kind of let go of my need to control it. And I think that's kind of a big practice from doing now, is needing to control the environment well, and kind of what we talk about impact, what can I control? Well, who is my impact, and what's out of my control? And kind of getting more and more wise about that. And that's reducing a lot of suffering for me.
That's beautiful. There's actually a scientist called Edmund Jacobson, and he developed the so-called progressive muscle relaxation technique. And that is based on the physiological fact that maximal contraction of a muscle is followed typically by maximal relaxation. So the process that you're describing is to basically exert yourself maximally and then enjoy the maximal relaxation period that follows.
We have just about one question, and maybe just to end with a little poetry as well. The last question, and then hopefully we can have a little bit of time for some audience engagement as well, as they might have some questions for you or comments. So I'll reverse the order in which we go. I think I'll start with Tyler this time with this question. So Tyler, and to all our beautiful eights, with all of our personality types, personality is when we are generally, for the most part, stuck in the ego. And when there is no personality, we're actually a lot more liberated. Just like every other type, and in all of our relationships, we get in trouble with each other often. We sometimes don't understand each other. We don't have empathy for each other. We have no patience and no curiosity sometimes. And no matter what our typology, we just butt heads with each other sometimes because our personalities are fighting for survival. And so as an 8, I'd love to hear from you. How can the rest of us really see you better, really understand you more, and really honor who you are as an 8 in a way where you really just get to be who you are? So, Tyler, if you could, if there was a question that a sentence you could complete that starts with, as an 8, I wish you would. Now, what would that be? How can we honor you more in your 8-ness?
Well, thank you for that, No Molly. Ooh, that's a doozy. I would say, as an 8, I wish you would let me be. And if I could elaborate on that, if we're in this meeting or we're having a conversation or anything, I do things a little maybe wackadoo, or with this energy, I might be doing push-ups, but I can still engage in the conversation. And I might even, just to kind of take my body out of it, just so I can exert all my energy, but I'm still fully here and present. And then I like to come back and join and throw, and that may not be as seen as, I've never done that in any kind of workplace environment. Well, except for now. Now it's like we have a chance. Do whatever your body feels like doing as we can converse. I might have you do a set of some presses. Another guy is doing pulls, and we're doing what feels good for us. And we're still having this community, this we space where we can talk and grow, share ideas. And it's like, hey, just let us be.
Yeah, beautiful. So as an 8, you have that sort of the never-ending force of energy in your body, and you may be really present in a certain situation. And what I'm partly hearing is, can we trust you in that? You would like for us to trust you in your space, in your body, in your energy, to do what you need to do, and in some ways to trust that you'll come back, that we can actually trust you. And that's really true for me. I mean, if I'm in trouble, I might not trust anyone as much as I might trust a really good, healthy 8 in that place. So you're present, and you wish that we would trust you more in that place and to just let you do your thing. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for restating that beautifully.
Thank you. Thank you, Tyler. So how about you, Phyllis? How can we honor you in your 8-ness, even as you explore the 8-ness more?
Can I just preface it by just being a part of this panel is really so cool. And listening to each of you has been really a great experience for me. And so thank you. Thank each of you very much. But now I'm going to say something funny given what I just said, because what I would like people to understand is that I never mean my opinions to be directives.
Mm.
I'm very opinionated, and I have a lot to say about everything. And I never mean them to be edicts or directives or really even sometimes I don't even know if I'm right. I'm just exploring something or, so I just wish people understood that, because I feel like I've had to dampen that so much in my life. I've dampened that tremendously in my life. And with many people who are closest to me in my family, I have actually almost taken a vow of I no longer give my opinions and I listen.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that my family thanks me, which just makes me really curious, because my feeling is if I'm not my opinions, then what the hell am I? But, don't you want them? But they don't. And so I wish that they just didn't take them quite so seriously and allowed me to give voice to them.
Beautiful. What you're pointing to is also something that is very true for an 8, which is the certainty. 8s have a certain kind of a certainty in their body, in what they say. And but when you present that certainty, or when you might explore something, perhaps what I'm hearing is that we shouldn't take it so personally, and we shouldn't think of it as though you are making a demand necessarily, or being my director, so to say. That just might be the way in which you're exploring an idea, and for us to maybe just engage you in that space with curiosity, perhaps.
It's just my opinion.
Yeah.
It's all, it's just my opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Phyllis. Yeah. All right, Esker, how do you wish we could be more honoring of you in your 8ness?
For me, I think to be more honoring of my 8ness is to give me space, to be able to move physically, but also to be able to make decisions, so that I can almost experiment with whatever idea I have in my head, whether it be regards work or trying a new experience, because often I don't know why or how I'm going to achieve whatever is going on in my head, but I just need the space to be able to give it a try. And what I don't like hearing, what I absolutely don't respond to, is to hear from someone that I can't do something or that I shouldn't do something, because that gives me the drive to go and do that. Whereas if I'm being able to give this, when I'm being given a space to try something, then I'll take the time to make the right decisions and take the right steps before, following through. So it's really comes down to having the space to be able to do things.
Yeah, I love that. And it's in some ways what I'm hearing, a word that you haven't used, but what I'm hearing in some ways, you're inviting people to actually just trust you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Trust me, I'm gonna do my thing, and you just need to give me the space and trust me.
Exactly. Yep. Very well said. Thank you.
Thank you, Esker. And then finally, you, Alistair. How can we honor you more as in your 8ness?
Well, I have the gift of listening to Esker and Tara and Phyllis. So, and being a little bit of a poet, I thought I'd write something. So, as an 8, I wish you to see the artful space holder, the energy poet, full of loving kindness, with the intention that everyone, whenever I'm in a space, feels safe to show up however they want to, however they feel. I'll just be there holding the space.
Wow. Yeah, that makes me feel a little emotional even. I think that's just that incredible, fierce need to protect of an 8. And that it's like, I know you got me if I needed you. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Wow. Amazing. And I can really feel that from each of you, really. Like if I'm in trouble, I just somehow there's this feeling like I can trust you. I can really trust you. So thank you. So there's this thing that Lee and I have been doing with each of our panels, and after this, we will open it up to the audience for a few minutes, maybe. We've been closing with a Rumi poem, and I wonder if I read this little excerpt from a poem from Rumi, if that speaks to you in some way. And just very briefly, in one sentence or two, you can perhaps comment on it. And if it doesn't relate to you, that's okay too. And here's the poem. There is a sacredness in tears. They are not the mark of weakness, but of power. They speak more eloquently than 10,000 tongues. They are messengers of overwhelming grief and unspeakable love. So perhaps I'll start again with Tyler. Tyler, does that ring a bell for you of any kind?
Well, I find myself, absolutely trying to protect my vulnerabilities because it pulls it right out. And I talked a little bit earlier about that hurt. And when you feel it so deep and you kind of want to protect others from feeling that, but you also can share it. You share that with others and it creates just that deep bond. And I think that's a really powerful poem. And Alistair, I really like your poem as well. And it does speak really, really deep.
Good. Thank you, Tyler. Thank you. How about you, Phyllis?
Yeah, what did I do? I started to cry. It couldn't speak more directly to me. Yeah.
All right. How about you, Esker? Maybe there's even like a particular word or a couple of words that speak to you.
Yeah, I think just the opening line that felt quite emotional to me. There is sacredness in tears, and sacredness in tears to me speaks about the strength in allowing your vulnerability to show, and therefore feeling stronger, feeling more powerful, powerful in yourself. I think this is it's a beautiful poem.
Good. Thank you, Esker. And to you finally, Alistair.
Yeah, that touches my heart, Namali, and it speaks to, power through the heart rather than power over. And I remember when I started doing men's work, Robert Masters asked us all, when was the last time that you cried? That was his opening question. When was the last time that you cried? And that, that's always struck with me. And then when I think about, those moments in life, a bit like Tyler was saying, crying a bucket of tears, that's when things opened.
Gorgeous. Oh, really good. Lee, maybe you can carry us through a couple questions or comments if anybody else has that for our amazing panel. And once again, I want to say just such a special, deep well of gratitude to Esker, to Tyler, to Phyllis and Alistair for joining us as panel members in just a few more minutes, maybe with our audience. Thank you so much.
So Adrian, I was going to ask, can we hear very briefly from you to start how you experience the relationship with you and Alistair and how it is to be in relationship with an 8, if that's okay with both of you?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, sure. Yes, that's a really interesting question. And it's something that we talk about a bit. In the beginning, I'd come from a relationship where I had to have a lot of responsibility because my partner was very irresponsible. And then I found that Alistair, when we got together later, was incredibly responsible and very, very caring and protecting, and something that I had never experienced before. Probably a little bit as a child with my parents, but nothing like the level of love and care and attention and protection. I'd never felt that active sense of protection before, and it was very wonderful and very freeing as well. And then I went through this process of realizing that almost always Alistair was right. And even, when we had differences of opinions, he'd give his view, and we'd have some conversation, and he'd patiently, and even if I held to my view, I would notice over time that actually what he had said was a better approach than my approach. So I got to the point within, I don't know, maybe a year or so, of thinking that he knew the right thing. And so then I stopped trusting myself so much and doing what he thought was right, which I'd never done before. Then what happened is he got very sick with glandular fever for 2 years. And I had to go on this journey of realizing that actually he was too unwell to make the best decision, and I had to take responsibility again, which in actual fact was quite an important thing developmentally for me and for our relationship, for me to regain my personal power, if you like, and then come to a place where we were, as he got better and we talked about this, he could see the journey that I'd gone on, which was my journey. It wasn't anything that he'd been trying to dominate in any way. But now we have a very good way of sort of talking through the options of things, and Alistair noticing when I'm about to do things that in the way that he believes is right, just because I think that he is usually right. And he's very careful now to say to me now, what do you really think? What's right for you? And I'm getting the feeling that for you, it might be different from what I'm saying. So we can navigate and talk about the power dynamic, if you like, a whole, in a really open, great way. And sort of brainstorm all the different options and the pros and cons. And then I feel completely supported in making my decisions about things that are for me, which is great. And I love being so loved and cared for and so well protected at every level. So those are the things that come to mind in the moment. Is there any other area, Lee, that you were wanting me to touch on?
I think this is beautiful because you described the dance between type 8 and type 9, where type 8 is indeed very forceful in the projection of ideas but also power implicitly, and type 9 can sometimes lose themselves and defer to out of ease or out of a desire to maintain relational peace. So I think your journey is very beautiful, where you sort of move in one direction and in the other direction to finally arrive at a beautiful balance. Cheryl, please.
Yeah, so this is a comment to the 8s. I realized is I have gravitated toward 8s, or made, and when I was a child, a very frightened little Enneagram 4 who had absolutely no confidence in herself and certainly not any out in the world, is that I had a couple of really close friends when I was a kid, and they were 8s. I mean, I just realized this, and what I was very unconsciously doing was latching onto, for lack, a better term, to eights who portrayed, who just held that confidence and that space, and that I couldn't do for myself. So I just wanted to let you eights know that if you might not know, that there may have been a frightened little child who got a lot more from you when she was young, or you were young, than you may realize. So I just want to thank you for being those wonderful people who can just hold that strength and that space for others.
Oh, that's lovely, Cheryl. Any responses from the Type 8 panel members?
I guess, it kind of points out to the fact that in the conformist stage too, and having some cronies back in the day in my old town, and again, kind of in this position of not necessarily wanting it, but definitely having a certain personality that other friends would look up to, and you could kind of keep the safe container for them, and it would a lot of this us versus you mentality, and that kind of carried. Definitely, I can see now that you pointed out different cliques throughout my life of people who are looking for that big brother type, looking for somebody to kind of guide them and protect them and to teach them. And that's kind of a role that then once I learn about it, it's like, okay, how can I do it better? So we need all of the other people to help us and check us so that we can continue to grow in everybody's best interest.
I totally agree with you, Tyler. I now that we talk about it, I start to realize that position, I was placed in that position as a kid, as a child, as a teenager, and I didn't really understand how that could happen. I couldn't obviously see what my friends and my peers were seeing around me, how they could see me. But I agree with you, Tyler. I think it's important for us to hone that skill or that natural characteristic in terms of how can we grow and develop that so that we can be more effective.
I'd thank you, Cheryl, for that reflection, and I notice that I love being around fours. That lovely creative energy really fuels a creativity in me, which is also like almost like the softening of the anger energy, being able to write poetry or to draw or just any of those creative things, being around that lovely energy of the four has been really helpful to me in learning how to soften into that creativity. So that feels like a transmutation in some way that I've experienced being around fours.
Just to Cheryl, in disclosure, Cheryl and I are good friends, and she's seen me through all of my struggles over the past couple of years with trying to work my way through the Enneagram. And so I'll be curious to talk more to you about it.
Yes.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Well, really good. So maybe we can wind down. Thank you, panel members, especially Alistair, Esker, Phyllis, and Tyler. We have our 9 panel coming up next, and we also are yet to reschedule our 2 panel, which we had to cancel because several of our 2 panel members were sick. Thank you. Lee, any last closing words?
Just gratitude. And one final observation, and probably all of the Type 8s know this about themselves, but one of the things that I personally appreciate very much about Type 8s is that they tend to, when they're healthy, they tend to derive great pleasure from lifting other people up. And they can really help people to manifest the best of themselves through encouragement and also through positive challenge. So I would say, thanks for doing that in the world.
Mm.
Yes. And I guess I have a funny thing to say that I love about type 8s, which is that I feel like with type 8s, I can share a dirty joke.
Oh, go on, Marley. You're going to have to give us one now.
I wish I had planned for that.
There's the challenge.
That's right. Oh my goodness. I really wish I could remember. And that's my problem, is that I love jokes and I never remember one when I need to come up with one. But there's that thing about the lust of the 8 is actually just so beautiful and juicy and sexy and full of life. And that's a place that the world needs, that energy as well, the challenging energy, but it's also that life force that oozes out of an 8 is just a very sensual and sexual and sexy energy, which is just really delightful. So yeah, maybe that's a good place for us to finally close, maybe. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.